Hello guys, David Vose here. Well, what a wonderful, beautiful day. All the clouds are gone and it's sunny and it's going to be up in the 60s and 70s this week. So it's beautiful. But I'm going to sort of go back to what we were doing yesterday. I know we're not going to do a whole video on all that. I just wanted to give you the answer. Because we were talking yesterday about that, what looked like an antennae, but some said it's a telegraph pole. And so we went back and we just kind of looked at it, and I didn't have any real answers. Well, one of the reasons is I needed to know the date and where that city was. Now, somebody in the comment section yesterday said that that city we were looking at with the antennae was Kiev, Ukraine, which was Russia at that time. So I thought, okay, well, let me go see if he's right. And I looked up pictures of that city, and I determined and confirmed that it is Kiev. It was Kiev. And so then I knew what city to look at, and I went and asked AI if they had electricity and if they had telegraph and what they looked like and everything. And I confirmed that that picture is legit. It's probably around 1890 or 1900 in Russia, in Ukraine. I show you some other pictures in Russia, in Moscow, here in a minute, to confirm that there's no hanky-panky going on. These are not antennas. And we're going to have to stop this nonsense and people just posting pictures saying, what's this? And leaving it like we don't know, so therefore it must be. If you're going to do any of this conspiracy stuff, get your facts straight, guys. Present the evidence before you put it out there. If you've searched all over the world and cannot find an answer and you want an answer, put it out there and say, what's the answer? But don't suppose that this is some alien electrical grid from ancient Tartaria, because it's not true. They didn't have electricity in the 1800s before the actual time that we actually invented electricity. So they always show you these pictures. All that, it may look like some kind of contraption, the way they've got it all drawn up there. And it looks pretty foreboding, like it's some kind of electrical machine with antennaes and crazy stuff. But it's just metal rods they use for art, sculpturing beautiful buildings with gargoyles and symbols. Some of it were lightning rods. We're going to show you here all the evidence for that. But then we're going to talk about some foods that you can find wild and then you can get started or planted in your garden that you never have to plant ever again. And you'll have food summer, winter, and fall and spring. A lot of this stuff I'm going to show you grows throughout the winter. You can harvest it. It grows back every year by itself. Hardly takes any care or you don't have to water it. Life is supposed to be easy. The things that the Lord provided grow by themselves. Agriculture is killing us. So I'm going to show you 14 different things that were vegetables in the ancient times that people used. One of them that tastes like meat, but it's a vegetable, like oysters. They were very important staples in ancient times that we no longer use because they wiped that kind of stuff out and Monsanto came along. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But they show us pictures like this and they say, oh, maybe this is some ancient electrical stuff and these are antennaes and maybe they're not steeples and crosses and beautiful contraptions that tell you which way the wind blows, or lightning rods, or just metal rods that they use as ornamentation. But it's got to be some kind of conspiracy. And so that's fine if you think it is a conspiracy and you want to show people and give your theory. But if you don't have an answer, if you're just speculating and you throw this garbage out there, and now it's going everywhere and everybody's involved in this huge conspiracy. They're hiding all this technology from us. It's not true. And by the way, a lot of these pictures aren't even in ancient times. They just show you pictures. It might be an old building, but in modern times, that they put an antenna on it since then. So, I mean, they come up with these ideas: cathoid, anoid. Oh, blimps were flying around. Yeah, for a short time in the late 1800s and stuff. Before we had airplanes, and everything took off around 1914 because of the war. Yeah, that was purposeful. Get everybody together in factories, start building all this technology. They made us slaves. They had a plan, yeah. But it's not some conspiracy like, oh, they covered over all this technology. And these ancient buildings, that's another situation, how they built these buildings, and if some of those buildings were standing hundreds of years before they claim they built them. Now that, I think there's some merit to that rabbit hole, which we're going to continue to investigate, and we're going to find out what Tartaria was and all of this. And if they did in some ancient days have technology, we'll find out. But these antennae, so-called antennae, that's not an antenna. So let me show you what I found out about this town you'll see on your screen here that we talked about yesterday. And I confirmed that that's not an antenna. And I confirmed the date and the city that somebody spoke of in the comment section yesterday. That's Kiev, Russia. And that thing that looks like an antenna is a telegraph pole. And we have confirmed that. And let me show you what AI says about it. So AI says, while pinpointing the exact date Kiev, Ukraine first received electricity is difficult without precise historical records. It's known that Kiev's electrification, like that of other areas in the Soviet Union, was a gradual process with significant advancements occurring during the Soviet era. Early electrification in Russia, including areas that would become Ukraine, was a slow process, with a first commercial utility appearing in 1886. Well, that's quite early. It's the 1800s. But I suppose the first place they would have electric lights would be on the streets, even probably before the homes. The Soviet government prioritized industrialization and electrification. They prioritized it, leaving to the construction of power plants and networks in the 1920s and 1930s. So up until that time, I'm sure all the houses didn't have electricity. Maybe the rich did. Maybe the streets. Maybe, just the downtown areas in these big cities. But I don't know. I'm just reading what they're saying. In 1964, they got a hydroelectric power plant. 1968. So the first electrical things you might see there would be around 1886 and on, from that point forward. So I asked, did Kiev have telephone poles in the 1880s? Or telegraph poles? Yes, Kiev likely had telegraph poles in the 1880s, as the telegraph was a technology that was widely adopted during that period. And Kiev, as a major city in the Russian Empire, would have been connected to the telegraph network. By the 1880s, the telegraph had become a common infrastructure element in many major cities and towns across Europe, including those within the Russian Empire. The railway, 1871. Water supply, 1874. Telegraph, 1889. 1890, telephone. 1892, horse team. 1894, power supply. 1929, tram. So they didn't have trams. They didn't have airports, trolley buses, or metro, or the internet. Okay. So, yeah, from around 1900 back, they had all these things. Back to 1871, they had a railway, I guess. They got the railway, then the water supply. and shortly after that, the telegraph and the telephone. Well, if 1 year after you got the telegraph, you got a telephone, why would you need a telegraph? They were expensive, from what I understand. If you wanted to send somebody a little message, it could cost you like $5. And that was a lot of money in those days. You imagine just a message. You didn't get to say much. Just, the horse died, or, come home or something. So I guess we've got our answer. But now I want to know, I want to see the design of that telegraph pole, if that's what it is. And I want to verify that's a telegraph pole. So basically, we can confirm that all this antenna stuff is bullshit. Now, I found some pictures to show you, but you look at these statues of these beautiful women. They're definitely Caucasian women. That is that gold statue, the statue of the lady, it was called. And that's now no longer in Chicago, but it's in Jackson Park, Chicago. I show you this picture because it's not that old, but it's a picture of a telegraph pole that does resemble that one we saw at the beginning and we talked about yesterday. It certainly does appear that they did have things that looked like that. They were not antennas, but telegraph poles. Asheville had telegraph in 1880s. California in the same time frame, 1847. This is the telephone lines that's the same picture I just had. But yeah, it was early on. They had all these wires and telephone and telegraph lines going everywhere. So and you can see they look very much like that one we saw. And electric cars. And now that picture is Kiev. How do we know? Well, it tells you at the top of the page, and that's 1890 to 1900. And you can see that temple-like thing in the background with that tower right to the left of it. That is Kiev, the same picture we were looking at yesterday with that crazy telegraph tower that we thought was an antenna. That's the same city, and we're not given the same angle. I don't even know if it's the same crosswalk, but you can see that big building on the right up ahead a little bit, and you can see those little metal rods sticking up. But that's the same city. Here's a better, more in color picture of it. And you can definitely see the lines and the telegraph lines and the electric poles and all the things that was going on. And that's 1890. That's Russia. They had, this is Moscow. There's electric lines. And there's that telegraph pole. Looks just like the other one. This is all in Russia. So in the 1890s, they had these telegraph poles in Russia and Kiev. And some of them look just like the ones we saw yesterday. So this has all been confirmed. There's another one there on your right middle. And that one has them all over on the left top. And that one's got a different looking one. And some very big, crazy, architecturally pleasant buildings. And so I asked, what were the poles on top of the buildings in the 1800s that looked like antennas? And AI answered a pretty good answer. They said in the 1800s, metal poles or structures resembling antennas. And these AI explanations are very precise, because that's exactly what I asked. On the buildings were primarily lightning rods designed to protect structures from lightning strikes rather than for radio or telecommunication purposes. Here's a more detailed explanation. Lightning rods, the primary function of these metal poles was to provide a safe path for electrical discharge from lightning strikes to the ground, thereby protecting buildings from the fire and damage. The concept of lightning rods dates back to the 18th century, with Father Procope Davis inventing a grounding lightning rod in 1754. And then Benjamin Franklin independently developing and popularizing his own design. Metal finials. Some buildings also featured metal finials. I looked that word finial up, and it just means at the top of a building there may be an ornament or a piece of metal coming out, or a star, or some cross, or some metal thing on top of the building, like ornaments and stuff. And sometimes you find those at the top or the apex of roofs, which could also act as lightning rods. But I guess they were just decoration. While the term antenna might come to mind, these structures were not used for transmitting or receiving radio waves, as radio technology was not yet developed in the 1800s. Utility poles, which were used for telegraph and later telephone lines, were also a common sight in the 1800s, but these were primarily wooden poles supporting wires, not metal structures on buildings. Now, I'm just wondering why we've got all this barrage of pictures and so many Tartarian videos showing you these rods and these things, and they're calling them antennas. There's one guy that's a very respected guy, I thought, maybe, back in there during the thingy time when he was exposing the thingy, and he was one of these respected guys. I won't mention his name, but he's constantly doing these on TikTok, these little shorts about these antennas, and saying it's some crazy thing, and we don't know when these pictures were made, must be the 1600s and the 1500s. No, all these things you see are usually buildings in the 1800s, and yes, they did have telegraph poles and telephone poles in the 1800s, and they did have electricity in the late 1800s, and yes, they did have ornaments, and they started using steel when they started inventing steel. I read this too. Part of the reason they were using these metal rods was to strengthen these structures. And domes usually had one in the middle, which caused some kind of structural support for the dome and so forth. And they would use them for beams inside the rock construction. And they would poke out at the top or the side sometimes, and they would just hang something on them or ornament them or something. But I don't know exactly, what they did. I'm kind of drawing my own conclusions from what I read. But this is what these things were. There definitely was a lot of architectural beauty that they wanted to put in these buildings with all the gargoyles and things. Certainly they would use these metal beams that they were now using for structural purposes to also enhance the beauty. So I do not see any reason to wonder if before the 1800s there were any of these antennae that they were using it for drawing electrical current out of the air, some people are claiming, or they had batteries and they were doing all this, that, and the other thing. I think it's just hype. Yes, I believe in Tartaria. I see the buildings in Chilago and different places that they burned down. I'm not going back on that. I'm going to double down on that. We're going to show that Tartaria may have, I don't even know if that was the right word you would want to use. That history's been taken away from us. We don't even know what they called themselves. But the entire world was being run by their own government, whatever government that was running them over in China and India and Russia and Africa or wherever, that we don't hear anything about. But let's not exaggerate these things, like these chemtrails. All the airplanes that take off from airports and go someplace, take passengers, they're not spewing chemical poisons on purpose out the back of their tailpipe. That is exhaust, friends. I'm sorry. That's what that is. It's just exhaust. And you see them more in humid areas and stuff like this, but we see them more today because there's more airplanes in the air. Many times more airplanes. That doesn't mean that they're not spraying poisons in the air. Crop dusters spray poisons in the air every day. I did a video a while back, I don't know, some years ago, several of them, showing these crop dusters dumping stuff all over the place in Texas. And then a few months later, all these trees and mesquite trees and junipers and pines or whatever was out there was all dead. And they wait a little while and then they go cut it down. I don't even know why. It kills all the bugs, the animals, the rabbits, the molecules, the biology, everything's gone. And then I guess they go in and plow it under and make corn, which is what I want to talk to you about today a little bit. This video is going to be kind of a two-part thing. So that was just to follow up on what these polls were. But let me show you what they've done to our eating habits and what we lived on for centuries, how people knew what to eat and they didn't have to necessarily, it's kind of like when Monsanto came in and started making all these seeds that wouldn't reproduce. You had to go buy seeds every year. And then they would like literally pay farmers or give them seeds for free and get them hooked on it. And then they'd lose all their old seeds. So they couldn't depend on seeds to make their crops. They had to go to Monsanto to get these genetically modified seeds. This is how they revolutionized the entire world in a short time. So that today, a lot of these, what we call today weeds, which in those days they called food, that naturally grew. The Lord gave us these natural things. Imagine if you walked out your front door and you were living somewhere, anywhere in the world, in nature, and you walked out and there was cabbages and potatoes growing and onions and celery and oranges and apples and nuts and everything just growing everywhere. But they couldn't have that. Just like that's the reason they got rid of all the buffalo here in America, because buffalo were free. So they made it illegal to hunt and took all these areas and made them Forest Service lands and BLM. You're forbidden to go there. They're controlling the land. So they could make a profit off of selling you beef and cattle and chickens and sheep and stuff that they raise that they can make money off of. So they don't want you going outside and eating food. If you go into the forest, there's still food, but they've taken the knowledge away. We don't know that everything on a pine tree is edible, and the early green pine cones were fruit and you could eat them. And acorns could be eaten, and pine nuts and yucca. And you think, oh, that's all weeds. And, the Aboriginal peoples ate those because they were starving. No, those are nutritious. If you ate those foods, you'd live forever. They're superfoods. They don't want you having these healthy foods naturally provided by nature. So all of the land in America and most of the world is bulldozed under, biocided, pesticided, insecticided, destroy everything living is gone, and they plant only these seeds from Monsanto that make a tasteless, chemical, poison dish. No nutrients that we need, like omega-3 acids and certain balanced proteins and vitamin C and all these nutrients and phytochemicals. We don't even really talk much about that. Phytochemicals. They're necessary. What, you think the only things that are necessary for your health is A, B, C, D, E, and vitamin, I guess there's a vitamin G too. That's it. Those are the essential vitamins. A, B, C, D, E, and G. I'm not sure what G is. I think there was one that there's a vitamin K. But that's it. There's no vitamin Z and L and M and R. It's just like 5 or 6 vitamins that they claim are essential. What about all the other essential things? Phytochemicals. See, we don't get them because you got to get the plants. The flowers have orange and red and these colors. Some plants in the wild have aromas. They're aromatic. They're colorful. They've got essential phytochemicals, and we're not getting them. And we're going to die if we don't get them, because these things balance our entire health system, reduce inflammation, and cleanse your body. And they have certain bacteria on natural foods as well that your body must have. Bacteria. Well, the diet we're eating today is all full of formaldehyde. Everything, the bread of any kind, white bread at the store, brown bread, all the bread, pizza, cookies, everything you're eating, everything is full of formaldehyde, or else it couldn't stay on your shelf for weeks. It would mold immediately. There is formaldehyde in everything, and it's killing you. You've got to go back to the natural vegetables and wild plants, because they're, we think of them as domestic and wild. Well, dogs or wolves, they're the same thing. You can take a wolf, get it as a puppy, raise it, voila, you got a dog. Yeah, there are different breeds and there are different temperaments, but they're dogs. Cats, wild pumas and lions, cougars. We call them kitty cats. We've bred them to where we can just have them for pets. Chickens, all throughout the world there's grouse and turkeys and ducks and things you could feed, and the birds just come in, the pigeons and the doves, they were all used for things in ancient days. How many people today even have pigeons unless it's for some kind of, they just want the pigeons for aesthetic purposes. They don't use them. They don't use them for sending messages. Now we've got to have telephones. Well, that's how they sent messages, with pigeons. And they had systems where they would get on their horses and take messages, things like that. They had ways. Today, you see a lot of people that get horses. They buy a home and they make a big white fence and they have all this acreage. And there you go. There's an Appaloosa, right? There's a beautiful horse. There's a Mustang. There's, they got these beautiful, colorful, majestic horses. Well, we haven't really used these guys for any real purpose since the car came along. So they breed them for racing. Do you think horses want to be alive on this planet just to race each other? So they got these horses running around their field and they're out there feeding them. They never ride them. They just want to look at them. Oh, I love horses. So we've got all these horses in the pen. You don't go out every day and pet them and ride them and live with them. When you were living in nature, you had your animals that you lived with. You depended on them. You protected your chickens and turkeys and ducks. You used your horses to go places. You connected with them like Avatar with the pterodactyl, and they stick their hair and intertwine it with the horse's mane, and they became one. Now you're one with your Jeep. It's unnatural. You don't smell the horse's sweat coming off his back and the heat of his body as you're jumping over cricks and overturned logs in the trail. That horse was your friend. We don't have that anymore. We just got people using it for beauty. We got a horse. And many of these horses are being abused out there in the field. Nobody ever talks to them. They're just out there stuck in a fence. These ancient cities in the 1400s and 1,000 years ago, we see these dark, dreary, dusty pictures. And we don't see any green or flowers or anything. The streets were all made of dirt, probably, because they didn't have asphalt. So we think it was just a nasty, horrid, difficult place to live. They were very unhappy, wearing all these heavy clothing and stuff. They were probably a lot happier then. And they were probably a lot healthier. Now, you say, well, then why did they all die at young ages? Well, they were enslaved. They usually died of accidents in the field. Sharp sickles crossed their hand, cutting their hand off their head, or falling into a pit and getting a broken leg, or an infection. This is what we hear all the time, that people died of infection. They didn't have penicillin. But, it's more than that. People were rounded up. The men were sent to war. They died in battle. There was constant war for thousands of years. And they were forced into it and drafted into these wars, and the women were left alone to fend for themselves, and they were raped and pillaged. They were put into these factories as slaves and worked with little nutrition. They just gave them this white flour. They didn't live in nature. They'd been used in agriculture for years, since Babylon and Samaria and Akkad and whatever in India. They put the fields into grains, and they had people who did that kind of thing and brought it into barns and bagged it and bleached it so that it could last for all winter. It's full of chemicals. Even then, wasn't pure, and it was killing people. And they ate tobacco and heroin and all these drugs. They gave it to them. They were slaves. And probably the reasons for that was because even in those days, they weren't living absolute perfect lives in nature, but there was still this industrialization. That's why they had these big cities. And clear back to the times of Babylon and Samaria and Egypt, people didn't eat vegetables like we're supposed to, but they went to a local place where they got bread, big, huge bags of flour, all the way back to Babylon. The days of Israel, they didn't grow their own wheat. There were people, there were farmers that grew it and made all this grain and put it in bags and sold it. White flour, white sugar, tobacco, coffee, gin, all poisons. I'm always saying that probably the only thing that they had in the 1800s that was healthy for you was their beans. They'd have bags of beans and the venison that they shot and the animals that they ate. Of course, I don't think that that's the best way to live. They probably didn't get enough of these vegetables, but they did get vegetables in their diet. And if you didn't live in a city, you're probably more likely to get vegetables and live longer because you lived off the land. So let me show you some things that I found out. I think 14 different plants that I want to tell you about that grow wild and natural. If you could find a place where they haven't sprayed Monsanto poisons all over the place and taken all these weeds out, because they've tried very hard to take out these particular vegetables that were staples for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, and then replaced it with things like celery and modern carrots and potatoes, which are fine, but they're not nearly as good as the old vegetables that we used to eat. So I want to go through these plants, because these are fascinating plants that grow a lot of places, most places. You could grow them pretty much wherever you're at. First one is scarlet. Scarlet is a beautiful plant. It's naturally sweeter than carrots, but it does look like carrots and has roots, and you can chop them up, put them in your soups and so forth. They're very delicious. It was once called a royal delicacy because I guess the royal kings and so forth loved it. And it was a hardy vegetable that would make it through even harsh winters. You could grow it just about anywhere. You could roast it, you could boil it, put it in your stew or your soup. You could make sweet pie with them. So they were sweeter, like I said, than carrots. So, kind of like sweet potatoes, you could make sweet pies with them. They were delicious and very healthy. And then we got Alexanders, which are a big, beautiful, 6-foot-tall plant. And they just grow everywhere. Their seeds are like, you can grind the seeds into like a pepper substitute, which would be something I would find enticing because I love pepper. I put pepper on everything, black pepper. And so if it kind of substituted for that, I would use it if I didn't have any pepper. Every single part of this plant, every single part of it's edible. The flowers, the stems, and the flowers are, you put them like in your salads. The stems are like celery. You can cut the roots up, put it in your soup. Like I said, it grows 6 feet tall, and it's very important because the insects and the animals in the neighborhood like it. So it's like brings in butterflies and beautiful insects. And it grows by itself. You don't have to plant it. Well, if you don't have any, you might have to go find some seeds and plant it. But once it gets going, come back every year. It's perennial. Then there's the King Henry II plant. And it grows the same way. You don't have to replant it. Comes back every year. It's very nutritious. It has a lot of iron and vitamin C. In spring, the leaves, the early leaves, are very nutritious. They taste like spinach. The little young shoots taste like asparagus. And the little buds look like, like broccoli or something. Little small broccoli. And you can use the leaves on your wounds. It helps infections. And you can take the root and make a tea, and it's kind of a laxative. Then we've got salsify. It's a long, thin root. You've got to peel it before you cook it. You can get it in winter. It grows during the winter. It can be stored for months. So if you harvest it, you can store it away, and it won't spoil. This is the crazy thing. It tastes, when you cook it properly, it tastes like oysters. It's a meat substitute. Priests used to use it as a fish substitute during Lent. So that's something that might be important to have in your garden. I mean, once you put these in your garden, they don't go away. They just keep growing, even if you've got harsh winters and snow. So, why plant gardens all day long? Like we're some kind of slave. Why is it that these plants just grow by themselves? Maybe we're out of sync with nature. Maybe we don't know how to live in nature. The medlar fruit. Very few people have ever heard of this. It's a fruit. Grows on a little fruit tree. The fruit has, the tree has long leaves, and they're brown. They kind of open up at the bottom. They have these like 5 little indentations or seeds. So you can tell that it's a medlar because of these 5 seeds in the opening at the bottom. It's bitter and it's very hard. But here's the thing. You have to let it spoil. You have to let it sit, and after you pick it, you let it ripen in the sun and let it kind of spoil for weeks. And then it turns into some soft, light brown, mushy, kind of sweet, cinnamon-looking, apple-like cinnamon sauce kind of consistency. This whole process they call bledding. You bled it. So it's kind of sour in it. That's why they make tarts out of it, jellies. They make wine out of it, which is kind of interesting. And it's the last of the fruits that are ready to harvest before winter. And you need plants that are ready at different times of the year. You need winter plants too, because you have all these vegetables growing in your garden, but they're only good in the summer. Then what are you going to eat in the winter? Then we got chickweed, which grows everywhere. Little tiny leaf plant, has little white flowers, pops up everywhere. It grows in any soil. It will sprout anywhere where it doesn't freeze too hard. It has thousands of seeds, each plant. And the leaves are gathered year-round, even in the winter. It has 7 times more vitamin C than oranges, and you can use the tea for fever and inflammation. Then we've got scorzonero. This is a plant like a carrot type thing, but it's got a long, instead of an orange root, it's got a black root. It's white on the inside. And it's sweeter than carrots. And it's sweeter than salsify. And it tastes like kind of a nutty asparagus type taste. You harvest it, bury it under the dirt in little mounds, and it will, after you've harvested it in the fall, and it'll stay fresh till the following summer. It'll purify your blood and helps with stomach problems. The Welsh onions, these are not actually true onions, but I guess they taste and look like onions, so I don't know. But they claim they're not true onions, but they are perennials. You don't have to plant them. Once you get them going, they grow back every year. And one single of these plants, you grow it, it gets a little cluster, you pull it apart into other clusters, and you keep planting these clusters. One clump, if you constantly divide it and allow it to multiply, it will make fresh green onion-like vegetables for soups, stews, and salads, and it stays green all the way through most of the winters. And it can feed a family for 10 years by doing this separating and dividing of these clumps and replanting it. But one clump, if you can just get one clump, you can get that to feed your family for 10 years. Then we got the fat hen, a superfood. It's got more protein than cabbage. It's got more iron than spinach, more calcium than kale. It was used as a chicken feed because of all the little seeds. And the chickens produce more eggs when they eat it. So you can feed it to your farm animals, and it's very healthy for them. It's called fat hen because when you feed it to your chickens, it'll make them really healthy and plump and make the eggs more healthy and plump. So the seeds then can be ground into flour, and the leaves can be put into salads and soups. I like breads. I like salad, but I like breads. And, since we don't have corn and wheat and stuff like this, if we're not going to be able to go to the store, then we want stuff like this, that we can use the seeds to grind into flour so we can make cakes and pancakes and biscuits. Then we got lovage. Lovage tastes really good. Tastes like celery kind of mixed with parsley, but it's a lot more intense. So it's very flavorful. One sprig flavors your entire pot of soup. You dry the leaves, sprinkle it on meat, take the seeds, grind them up, make bread. There's another one of these plants that you can make bread from. You boil the roots. The oil aids digestion. It reduces bloating, and it's a mild diuretic. You can make tea, and it helps your kidneys and your stomach. It grows 6 feet tall, and it'll last for 20 years. It'll grow for 20 years, the one plant. Survives any harsh winters and grows bigger and better every spring. Corn salad plant grows near fields of grain. That's why they call it corn salad. It's some kind of a plant that grows near a field of grain or corn. And throughout winter, it'll grow. It tastes kind of nutty. It's not very bitter. It's very sweet. Like some other vegetables. It has lots of omega-3, and that's important for our diet. We've got to find food that has lots of omega-3. Of course, your acorns and pine nuts and a lot of things have omega-3 in the wild. Store-bought things don't have omega-3. Your eggs are supposed to have it. It's not at the store. You can't get the omega-3 in this modern milk and eggs and stuff because they're fed genetically modified corn, and they don't have omega-3. So this is important for your omega-3 fatty acids. It has a lot of iron and vitamin C. Then we've got tansy, which is a vegetable that they used in the old times. They couldn't live without it. It's a perennial, grows back every year, very aromatic, has yellow flowers. You can make a pudding or a dessert with it using eggs and cream. The leaves are very good. You can infuse your wine and your ale with it. a natural preservative, extends the shelf life of meats when you sprinkle it on there, and baked goods. Tansy tea is used for intestinal worms, fever, digestion issues, culinary and medicinal uses galore. It repels flies and other insects. Then we got sea kale. Huh. Now, I probably wouldn't find that around here wild because I don't live by the sea, but some of you do. And you can go and get it and plant it wherever you're at probably. Maybe put a little salt in the soil. I don't know. Because it grows in very sandy, salty soil. And the young shoots taste like asparagus. The mature leaves taste like cabbage. It's mild, but kind of sweet. It's got 6 times more vitamin C than lemons. And you find it near salty beaches or by the ocean. Then we've got woad. Now, this is interesting because, you know, if we're going to be surviving in the world and in nature, you got to have all kinds of things, not just food. But this is a food. It's very edible, but it's also used for blue pigment and for dye or for paint. You might need that if you're out in the wild. This is how they would get colors to dye their clothes and have beautiful garments and things, and blankets. So it's edible before you're able to develop the blue out of it. In the spring, you can eat it as a salad and you put it in your soups. It tastes like mustard greens. But after that, it starts to mature and you can use it to make this blue dye. So anyway, I think these are very interesting plants, and I just wanted to point them out because we got to start doing something to get prepared. I think what we need to do, instead of trying to get seeds for a garden, I think we need to find seeds from these perennials so we can plant them. And they sound very tasty. We need to learn how to use them, cook them, but plant them, these perennials, they'll grow back every year and you won't have to plant them and you'll always have food. But anyway, I'm going to just leave it at those plants today. We'll probably look into other plants and things later at some other time, but I just wanted to inspire you guys to think about this now. Over the summer, start looking for these wild exotic plants that are perennials and will be so hardy and you'll never have to be without food. I just encourage everybody to get these and plant them and others like this. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you have a wonderful evening, guys. The Lord will bless you. His grace and His peace will be with you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.